Hello, everybody. Welcome into this space. Today is January 18, 2023. My name is Dr. Carrie Arnold, and I'm the Program Director for Evidence-Based Coaching here at Fielding Graduate University. I am joined today by some pillars, some giants, I should say, in the coaching field, and I'm really excited to introduce them. Just a few logistics before you start listening to our great panel. You want to keep yourself on mute while you're here. This session is eligible for an ICF-CEU. You need to be live to receive that. I will post an evaluation link about 15 minutes before the top of the hour. This is a 90-minute session. This is a little bit longer than what we normally do. So you'll want to wait for that link, fill out the evaluation in the next 12 to 24 hours if possible, so that we can send you an ICF-CEU through the registrar's office at Fielding Graduate University. It is being recorded, so if you miss any of this, you can access the recording sometime next week on the Fielding webpage if you go to Evidence-Based Coaching. The other thing I'll be posting is a link to our February session that's coming up, and another author will be here talking about ethics in coaching, so you want to stay tuned for that. Again, I want to welcome you to those who are here. I am excited to introduce Francine. Francine used to be one of the program directors here in evidence-based coaching, along with Dr. Terry Hildebrand. And Francine is going to serve mostly as your host, and I'm delighted to turn it over to Dr. Campone. So you're all spotlighted, and if you need me, you let me know. I'm going to slip into the audience now.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Carrie, and I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining this webinar. As many of you know, coaching supervision, which is becoming fairly well established in Europe and the United Kingdom, is really gaining traction in the Americas as a valuable resource for ongoing coach growth and development. Coaching supervision serves several functions: supporting coach well-being and resilience, fostering coach growth and self-development, and promoting alignment with ethical and professional standards of practice. In 2021, my colleagues at the Americas Coaching Supervision Network, and that is Lily Seto and Dr. Damien Goldvarg, they really wanted to document that growth, and so they invited me to serve as the lead editor for the book that we'll be exploring today. We sent out a call for chapter proposals to over 300 ACSN members, and I would note that ACSN membership is now coming close to 400. And the 18 chapters that we'll be touching on today were the result of that call for proposals. Our authors represent the voices and perspectives of coaching supervisors in North, Central, and South America, along with a few co-authors in France and the UK. And each panelist, each of my colleagues here, is going to be presenting a summary of one of the key themes in the book. We group the chapters thematically. The themes are diversity in supervision, supervision and coach well-being, perceptions of coaching supervision by coaches and organizations, and finally, supervision in coach education and development. Reflection is really a key element of coaching supervision. So we've structured this presentation to include some time for reflection as you hear the ideas and information. So please have some writing materials on hand. And as each presenter finishes speaking, we'll have 2 to 3 minutes for you to just jot down whatever comes up for you: questions, ideas, resonances, maybe even visceral responses. Okay. After the presentations, we'll break out into small groups for discussion, and then we'll wrap up with a debrief of your perspectives, your insights, and perhaps have time for questions as well. It's my pleasure to introduce or reintroduce my colleagues today. Lily Seto, who's a Fielding alum, noted that as she starts to move into eldership, She's finding opportunities to influence our profession in whatever small ways possible. Sarah Evans says that she shines a light on what's possible in the reflective space, and many of you know Sarah. And Terry Hildebrand, former director of the evidence-based coaching and executive coach and coaching supervisor, is an advocate for coaching supervision for all coaches. I'm Francine Campone, past director of evidence-based coaching, the second director after Eleni. I'm a coaching supervisor and a thought provocateur. So in sequence, we will hear from Lily, who will then pass the virtual microphone to Sarah, who will in turn pass the virtual microphone to Terry, and then it will come back to me. Lily, please.
Thank you, Francine. And great to see some names and familiar faces from the past. Talk about alumni and talk about pillars. I see Sam McGill's on here. He's probably one of the most senior elders in the coaching supervision field here in North America. And in fact, he was my faculty member when I was in the very first CSA program here in North America 10 years ago, I would say at least. And since then, I have supervised as an internal supervisor, external supervisor, both group and individual. And a lot of my focus has turned to diversity work in supervision. I run a couple of Black, Indigenous, people of color groups, and we just completed a coach training program for Indigenous coaches. One of the chapters in the book is focused on supervision in the Indigenous world. And this has been a very special space for me. Some of you might know the history, the sordid history of the Indigenous people here in Canada. I've been working in this field for probably 6 or 7 years. It's mostly by invitation. It's not something that I think you knock on the door and say, let me help you. And I've had some of my clients, my coaching clients, Indigenous coaching clients, go off and do coach training programs, and had, let's say, mixed success in feeling their sense of belonging in the space. And so that precipitated the coach training program for Indigenous coaches. And now we're looking at the supervision space and what comes up in that space in supervision. And so the chapter on coaching in the Indigenous spaces was a very humbling experience to write. I wrote it with Mary, she's a coach, and with Leanne Loish, some of you know her, she is a supervisor. And I had been bringing coaches in to work with me in this Indigenous space and inviting some supervisors to work in that space. And so we had a conversation about, well, what's different about that space and what's the same? And the chapter came out of that. So as I share a little bit about the chapter, I would invite you to notice how you're responding somatically, mentally, from your head, from your heart and your gut, for your reflection question at the end. So, and I want to also acknowledge that I live in Victoria, which is the traditional territory of the Wasanic and Algonquin speaking people here in Canada. The focus of supervision with coaches working in the Indigenous field, some of the big themes that came out, we interviewed 6 other coaches and supervisors who worked in the space. And the big themes were many coaches, many clients that who are Indigenous, the very first lens that they look at in any space is this a safe space for me? Do I feel like I belong? There is some intergenerational trauma here in Canada around residential schools and some of the wrongs of the past that live on through the generations. So there is a safety lens that is very present all the time. There is a cultural safety and humility. So this is around, how do I, as a coach or as a supervisor, how can I be humble enough to accept that I don't know everything, and that this is a space of reflection, and for me to acknowledge I don't know what I don't know, and to learn from my colleagues, and we learn together in this space. A big part of Indigenous culture is relational practice. And what that means is, if I can't create a relationship with you, we can't do the work we need to do. And what is that going to take for us to create this relational practice? And one of my mentors, an Indigenous mentor, she tells me, we did a facilitation together, and she said, you know, we can put 40 minutes down for group agreements and introductions, but if it takes 2 hours, it takes 2 hours. That's relational practice in this space. People need to say what they need to say, acknowledge who they are and where they come from and the land that they're on and their ancestors. And so we honor that space. We don't cut them off. There is a huge spirituality sitting in this space as well, honoring ancestors, honoring all the creatures in the forest and on the land, and that everything is connected. And so there is that theme that permeates through the conversations as well. And also future generation thinking. There is, I don't remember which tribe or First Nations says, you know, we think 7 generations into the future. So what is my decision? How does that impact 7 generations forward? So there's some of that systemic thinking that shows up as well. Some of the learning that we came up with was around unconscious biases and scripts and sayings and beliefs that we heard as we grew up, because it was really a different world back then, really heavy into discrimination. And now we have what we call the reconciliation in Canada, where we're working hard on righting the wrongs. And so, and at my generation too, I'm in my 60s. I still hear some of those tapes from the past of what people said about Indigenous people. And so I'm making sure that I acknowledge that it's still in my head, and then what do I do with it? The other piece of when I bring coaches in to work with me in this space, I want to be sure that they know the history of the Indigenous people of Canada, and they have some trauma-informed practice of some sort, and it's not therapy. Know when you get triggered in terms of your own traumas that you may have encountered and what you're going to do when that happens. And then being able to recognize the potential for trauma to show up in the space, and how do you pause and have that conversation that needs to happen. Very important. There is a piece around spiritual attunement as well, being aware that everything is connected and what's that spiritual space that we are in. Some of the Indigenous clients that I work with are Christians and some aren't, because of some of the history. So there's that piece too, and the differences and nuances, and being really comfortable with not knowing. So those were the big themes. And I don't believe, I might stand corrected, but I don't believe we actually have an Indigenous coaching supervisor. If anybody knows, I'd love to have a conversation with those individuals. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to ask the question of reflection. As you listened, what did you notice around your thoughts, feelings, and your somatic reactions? And what are you sensing about this work? And I will pause there. Thank you for your time.
This is Risa Martin. Is it okay to speak up like this?
Actually, we're going to ask you to hold questions until you get into the small group discussion. So we would invite you to note your question and we will come back to it. But we would like you to get the whole picture of all of these themes and arenas, and if that's okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Sarah?
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Lily. And I am just delighted to be in the room and honor those who are joining us and to be with fabulous colleagues. I'm can't say, just has warmed my heart so much, and the opportunity to share our book. I am speaking on behalf of 6 authors this morning. We were all writing at the height of the global pandemic and the multiple complex challenges that were and issues that were swirling all around at that time. And unbeknownst to any of us, we all chose to focus on this theme of how we work. How do we support our supervisees be fit for purpose, and how to bring our core, our self as instrument to our work. We were also, all 6 of us in different places in the Americas, were also attending to the supervision space and co-creating the conditions for reflective and transformative learning. And a common thread that weaves throughout our chapters is our shared belief that evoking reflection that fosters growth, resilience, and well-being is a core purpose of supervision. And the chapters reflect the impact for the supervisees. And we also, when I was reading through the chapters and looking for what are those common themes, what I noted was another one, a really deep appreciation for the gift of presence. And myself, I'm in Victoria, similar to Lily in Canada, and I was writing with Alexis Chamo she's from Los Angeles in California in the US. And our chapter is on resourcing, restoring, and responding through coaching supervision. And the focus is on a practice of noticing, embodying, and cultivating resilience. And you might recall Damien Barr's the famous tweet of April 21st, 2020. We are not all in the same boat. We are all in the same storm. And that led an anonymous author who Barr cites to pen a poem that included these last 2 lines. It is very important to see beyond what is seen at first glance, not just looking, more than looking, seeing. And for us, that captivated us. Those 2 lines epitomized the supervision space. And it also gave us the metaphor to carry out through the chapter. How do we be in the storm? Both of us live on the west coast of North America, so the oceans and the storms are very much part of our lives, ways of being, ways of being in nature. So I invite you to reflect on the metaphor of the storm in your own world. And how do we be in that eye of the storm, that calm space when the storms swirl all around us? We know in our world that there is always a perpetual state of disruption and transition. And while the specific challenges of any moment may be addressed, we hope, there's always going to be forces that impact us. So we ask, how can we best support ourselves to source and resource? Find that eye, to be that calm in the storm, and also offer that calm space in the storm in the supervision space. And we did a lot of research, dove into the literature, and we took the perspective of resilience from natural systems, where there is more of an absorbing, adapting, and continuing. And we kept exploring, what are we noticing in ourselves, in our supervisees, in the cases that they're bringing forward? And from these experiences, we created a framework for responding. And we share 2 case studies in our chapter. And so there's some demonstrated impact for our supervisees. And one of the things and I don't know why this was coming up in both our worlds at the time, but it was strengthen your core, strengthen your core. You know, in that physical space, if you have a strong core, you have that strong backbone, and you have a strong physical presence. And so we've expanded that sense of strengthen your core into cultivating core, self as instrument, and developed 7 core, or created 7 core, let me say that, they're out there in the world, 7 core energy sources, which we call the 7 C's, which are held in and with compassion. So I invite you to read the chapter for more on these 7 C's and the framework of relational spaces to cultivate resilience resourcing in our supervision conversations. So meanwhile, back on the East Coast, our colleague Ken Giglio in Pennsylvania was exploring a similar theme of resilience and well-being. And his chapter is called Supervision in Globally Challenging Times, Supporting Coach Wellbeing by Reflecting Through 3 Lenses. And he said, it's how we as supervisors use our present moment and centered attention, which calls noticing, and our presence, that felt sense of being, to support the same attention and presence within our supervisees. And from that centered space, we can look through 3 lenses. And this is his tri-lens of coaching supervision model. And so he says, one of those lenses is the view from the inside out, self as supervisor or self as coach. Another of the lenses is the view from the outside in, the client lens. And the third lens in the tri-lens model is that view from the balcony and beyond, the systems lens. And Ken weaves 3 principles of existence from Buddhist thought. And, you know, when I was reading the chapter, I was nodding my head and thinking, yeah, I'm thinking we'll all be nodding our head on these principles ourselves. Challenging times are part of the natural course of human life. Everything is always changing. Our ego or sense of self is our reactive self and not the core source essence of who we are. And so Ken's chapter explored and includes voices from case examples. How do we work with the anxiety, fear, and judgment in the current environment to get to a place that is more of equanimity? And how do we support supervisees notice dissipation, distraction, even despair? And how can they move themselves to a place of well-being? Our colleague, Lynn Harrison in Whistler, BC, and her co-author, Martine Bizouard in Paris, wrote a chapter, and I love this title, The Magic of Group Supervision. Their study sought to explore how group supervision supports transformative learning experience for seasoned or senior coaches in the Americas. So they conducted a phenomenological study that's to study the lived experience of 10 coaches who were well established in their practice, so more than 5 years, and who participated in group supervision with a qualified coaching supervisor. The interviews were conducted in 3 different languages, the languages that were of the group supervision, French, Spanish, and English. And participants were from the 5 countries in the Americas: Canada, the US, Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay. And the participants' stories reflected that group supervision is highly effective in supporting ongoing development And the participants indicated that it was truly a transformative learning experience. And you will want to read the chapter to discover the 3 main magic ingredients that Lynn and Martine found that contributed to the profound impact of group supervision. The last chapter in the how we work theme that I wanted to share with you is written by Susie Warman from Mexico. And she spends time in Florida as well. And her chapter is called The Creative Journey in Coaching Supervision. And by the way, creativity was one of the 7 C's that Alexis and I found to be important to support resilience. So Susie's hypothesis, and check this out, whether this holds for you. Being creative in a supervision space session helps the supervisee go deeper and gain awareness and understanding, which otherwise might not be available to us if we stay completely in our heads. So by utilizing unconventional methods, supervisees can surpass unconscious barriers and overcome an unwillingness to face vulnerability. And informing this chapter were, I see some nods on that one, were Susie's own experiences, as well as insights collected from an online survey, some interviews, and assessment of 20 supervision recordings. And the findings and shared creative techniques related to the use of metaphor, the use of images, narrative, play, crafts, objects, costumes, music, corporal movements, and you will love the findings. Her conclusion: there is no doubt that being creative opens unconscious barriers and strengthens our willingness to face vulnerability, bringing new insights and awareness. So with this conclusion from her research, Susie challenges us to reflect on what does it take for us to be courageous and confident in using our creativity in our work. And as I close my comments, I'd like to share a piece from Rumi that Ken actually used in another chapter that he co-wrote with our colleague Lynn DeLay. The quote from Rumi: "Be with those who help your being. Don't sit with indifferent people. Your work is deeper." And in the spirit of this quote, my provocative question is, how do you creatively cultivate your core to support your resilience and well-being in order for you to do the deeper work? How do you creatively cultivate your core to support your resilience and well-being in order for you to do the deeper work? Thank you.
Terry?
Francine, would you like me to go next? Okay, great. So welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be back in the Fielding online community. I'm going to be covering perceptions of supervision from coaches and others. And there's been a number of chapters that either did research studies or did case studies on real life experience. So I'm going to be summarizing those chapters. I think you'll find this data really interesting. There's lots and lots more that I'm not going to cover. So hopefully just be a taste that will get your appetite whet for reading more in the book itself. So I'm going to start with the research study that was done by Kim McAnally, Lillian Abrams, Mary Jo Asmus, and myself, which was part of a larger study on global study that we did. And we took the data out of that study and analyzed it for the Americas specifically. So it's chapter 3, coaching supervision, a study of perceptions and practices in the Americas. And we had, this is the largest study of its kind that has been done to date. We had 500 coaches from the Americas along with supervisors. And we asked them quite a number of questions. And I'm going to give you a highlight of some of the interesting results that we received. And when asked about the benefits of coaching supervision, working through a client challenge was the most popular. And also developing my coaching skills was almost equally popular. And this second is not often described as the purpose of supervision, but that is the benefit that these particular respondents came up with. It does lead us to believe that there's some confusion in the Americas on the differences between coaching supervision and what we call mentor coaching for an ICF credential. Many of the respondents said that they received supervision during their training program, and we know that that's likely not accurate, that instead they received mentor coaching for an ICF credential, which is required for all accredited programs at the PCC or higher level. So there is, I think, some confusion still in the Americas on exactly what is supervision and what is mentor coaching. We also asked about cost of supervision, and there was a wide range of prices that people pay, but in the Americas region, the average was $201. We also asked about the frequency, and once a month was 42% of the respondents who had received supervision. So once a month seems to be about the right cadence to receive supervision. And given the usefulness of supervision, it is notable that many respondents had yet to work with a coaching supervisor. The various reasons given for this were 29% of the respondents who reported, I belong to peer networks where I can get support when I need it. And 14% indicated it's not required by the organization I work with. And another 14% said, I do my own reflective practice. So I do encourage you to read the book. There's lots of graphs and data. If you like research, you can read a lot more about what's going on from the perspective of supervisors and coaches in the Americas in chapter 3. We also have chapter 4, resistance to coaching supervision in the Americas. The study was done by Lily Cito and Dr. Damien Goldvarg, along with Sarah Eustace. They went out and talked to some EMCC coaching supervisors on what they believe the resistance to supervision is all about. There was a follow-up survey that 150 supervisors responded to. The main themes were the resistance comes from, number 1, awareness and understanding, number 2, expenditure, and number 3, vulnerability. They recommend some strategies to counteract these themes, being education, number 2, exposure to experiencing supervision, and number 3, promoting and professional support. We have found from my own experience that people who get a firsthand experience of what supervision is tend to understand it better and appreciate what the value is. Chapter 5 was by James Lapata. He did the business case for coaching supervision, an American tech-enabled coaching platforms drive for quality. And what he found is that while coaching supervision has been expanded among coaches, it's unclear exactly what might be its benefits to corporate clients beyond its ability to help make coaches more effective for their clients, which we do know supervision does that. This chapter used a case of one coaching platform that has experimented with providing coach supervision to all its coaches. So everyone in this organization gets supervision if you're a coach. While there's no hard data connecting coaching supervision to better outcomes for clients, the platform determined that there is enough evidence suggesting the overall benefits to clients, particularly when it comes to deploying group supervision and addressing systemic people development issues, that it continues to offer coaching supervision to all its coaches. So this group is continuing to offer supervision after trying it out and seeing its value. We also have Sarah Tennyson. She supported a study as well, looking at coaching supervision with coaches and adapting a coaching supervision approach with leaders and organizations. And it illustrates the link between coaching supervision as developmental intervention that can support coaches and leaders to respond to challenges of today's complex world, and also offers structures and processes for holding supervision conversations in coaching setting with leaders as a way of supporting greater complexity of mind. So they looked at supervision as supporting leaders, not only coaches, which is a really interesting case study from Sarah Tennyson. We also have chapter 10, which is internal coaching supervision, insights into 2 US-based cases and perspectives. This was done by Jerry Browning, Theodora Fitzsimmons, and Jackie Arnold. Their discovery from internal supervision is being part of the organizational system. Boundaries, confidentiality, and safety are unique challenges for internal coaches, and reasons for internal coaching supervision is critical. So, the unique challenges that internal coaches have make supervision especially useful for them. And how do you know your internal coaching needs supervision, and where do you begin? Well, these cases illustrate real situations in organizations and provide insights to detect the precursors of coaching supervision that lie in the internal coaching of any organization. While including coaching supervision at the beginning of building an internal coaching program is recommended, each of the cases share how to integrate coaching supervision in existing internal coaching initiatives. How can we establish internal coaching supervision, and what are its benefits? Internal coaching supervision creates intentional safe space to help internal coaches identify internal coaching challenges, such as blind spots, unknown biases, gaps in knowledge, potential ethical dilemmas, and burdens of secret knowledge and compassion fatigue. Each of these cases also share ways for dealing with the different challenges, how to protect anonymity while discussing coaching issues, and to develop ongoing support for coaches to evolve within the organization. Increasing coaching capability and capacity to sustain good practice of internal coaching for all the internal coaches, the internal clients, and the organization were some of the benefits that they found. I do have one question for your reflection quiet time. What would it take for you and your organization, if you're an internal coach, to adopt coaching supervision as a standard monthly practice?
Thank you all. And so I would like to circle back on our final theme and circling back to Lily's concept of thinking ahead 7 generations. In this last overview, I want to talk a little bit about what we found in the book about the education and developmental journey of coaches, because I'm someone I've been involved in coach education and development for many, many years, as an educator, as a mentor, and now as a coaching supervisor and researcher. And certainly, we want to think about how do we continue to evolve this generation of coaches so that this generation of coaches contributes to the next and also to the evolution of the field, right? Because coaching as a field of practice itself needs to continue to evolve and mature as the world fluctuates, changes, moves. And so in this last section, I'll talk a little bit about 3 chapters that really speak to the education and development of coaches and the role of supervision in that process. The first chapter I want to talk about is by Pam McLean, Dr. Pamela McLean, and she wrote about the developmental journey of coaches, because however long you've been coaching, however many certifications and qualifications you have, we're all of us still on the journey. And Pam's chapter drew on a qualitative study into the impact of supervision on the coach's development and the use of self, right? We are the key instrument in coaching. And her study involved 60 participants, all of whom were graduates of the Hudson Institute Coach Training Program, which includes supervision for program participants. She used an online questionnaire with predominantly open-ended questions, and then conducted a formal thematic analysis. Pam grouped her respondents in the developmental frame of mind according to the number of years they've participated in monthly group supervision. And she broke them down into 3 groups. What she called, first of all, the early stage, that is coaches who'd had 1 to 2 years in group supervision. The mid stage was coaches who had 3 to 4 years of group supervision, and then the later stage, which had 5 or more years. And what she found was that there were different levels of awareness as a result of supervision and explored how these impacted both the coach and the client. People who were in that early stage, 1 to 2 years of coaching supervision, she found had primarily a self-focus. What they brought to supervision was performance questions. What's happening to me? How am I doing? They were very performance oriented, and they were concerned about giving value to clients, meeting expectations. What they brought in the supervision sessions was about self-judgment, using their own life experience as a frame of reference, making judgments about the client or the circumstances, or maybe managing the urge to rescue or shift from negative to positive. She found that supervision helped coaches in these early stages to surface their stories and then to explore the impact of those stories on their work with clients, their tendency to drive the process rather than trusting the client and the process. Participants in the mid stage with 3 to 4 years of experience in supervision groups were more aware of the client and what was happening to the client, what the client's needs were. She found some shift away from self-performance and awareness and needs, and supervision helped those coaches recognize their inclinations and habits that kind of cross boundaries. As a result of supervision, coaches in that group reported having greater presence with others. And then finally, coaches in the later stage who had 5 or more years of group supervision had a much more dynamic awareness of all 3 levels of self, client, and relationship. Pam found that supervision enabled dynamic co-creation with clients, that there was more flow in the coaching interaction, that coaches were able to pay equal attention to themselves, the client, and the in-the-moment experience, and to trust their intuition and engage in a more emergent process with clients. Some of the implications that Pam suggests in particular is that coaches really need to engage in a continuous multi-stage journey of development, and that training and supervision need to be tailored to the coach's developmental stage. That supervision is an important tool for helping coaches become aware of their self, their identity and inner narratives, and to ultimately engage with clients as separate beings in a collaborative and organic process. The second chapter on coach development and the role of supervision picked up the theme, and this was by Angela Wright. It picked up the theme of continual coach development in the context of an increasingly complex and fluid environment, the systems in which we're all working now. Angela's chapter was based on a US study that considered 4 areas for exploration. The first was the coach's capacity for systemic and network thinking. The second was the importance of personal as well as professional development. The third was the role of internal coach, similar to some of the other chapters, and the ripple effects of internal coaching. And then finally, understanding supervision and who needs it. With regard to systemic and network thinking, Angela found that supervision practices really pointed to the linear nature of most of the original coaching super models. And she found that supervision really helped coaches see the bigger picture, the multiple dimensions of coaching situations, and to consider the interactions and effects of those elements on the system as a whole, as well as on the organization and the individual client. With respect to personal and professional development, Angela's findings really echoed Pam McLean's in the concept of a developmental journey with the use of self at the center, rather than performative adherence to models and methods. And there are other studies that really are starting to surface the performative nature of much of the coaching work that's being done. Supervisees really reported greater self-confidence, a sense of integrity and authenticity, reflexivity, and a greater depth of understanding in their coaching work. With regard to internal coaching and ripple effects, Angela found that internal coaching, as you probably all know, is a growing trend, and it presents several challenges along with benefits. These include multiple roles and boundary management, ensuring coach competence and qualifications, coach biases, perceptions, and organizational knowledge. Supervision provided a safe space for exploring these issues for internal coaches and really helped them gain insight into the possible impacts of organizational culture, power dynamics, and expectations. The other thing supervision did for internal coaches is it really supported a normative framework that is coaching professionally and ethically, as well as developing coach capacity and providing a restorative function. And then finally, the process of understanding what supervision is and who needs it. As Terry mentioned earlier, by participating in supervision, participants began to see the links between training, theory, and practice, and to start to engage in development distinct from learning a new tool or a new model. Participants found that supervision is a valuable means of development for all coaches, regardless of experience or number of certifications. And I know, Terry, that's near and dear to your heart. Coaches at all stages benefit from balancing technical knowledge, ethical responsibility, and accountability, and having experiential and transformative learning about self, which is at the core of supervision experience. The third chapter I want to talk about is Elena Espinal and Adriana Rodriguez, who have a coach supervision training program, and they have a coach training program, and they introduced supervision into their coach training program. Now, their coach training program is an ICF accredited coach training program operating in Argentina and Mexico with strong existentialist and ontological orientations, which means a focus on being in addition to doing. And that, to them, meant that attention on supervision is an appropriate complement to competency and skills training. They tested a premise based on observation that supervision improves coaching presence and deepens awareness, and a commitment to expanding awareness of the value of coaching supervision. And so Espinal and Rodriguez conducted a pilot study to test the premise that incorporating coaching supervision would also strengthen competencies associated with the coaching mindset, presence, and trust. And what they did was they compared and they contrasted the perspectives of two groups of participants. They actually did a more traditional study form. Those who had one individual and 3 group supervision sessions, and those who did not. All of the participants went through the regular training program activities. The measures included pre-program and post-program questionnaires and interviews for both groups. They found that supervision had an impact in 3 areas. First was lessening coach performance fears and anxieties, right? And these included things like lessening the fear of not providing value, as well as reducing the coach fears of being vulnerable. Supervised coaches felt more free to engage in a vulnerable and human space. Supervised coaches were also more attuned to transference phenomena and able to respond appropriately. The second area was the impact on the coaching relationship. Participants in the supervision group reported experiencing greater empathy for their clients, greater self-confidence, and the ability to let go of control. Being able to be open allowed these coaches to engage with greater curiosity and openness in their coaching. And then the third was looking at the effects on ICF competency behaviors. The coach self-reports on shifts were actually checked against mentor assessments in this third area. Supervised coaches demonstrated greater skill in establishing trust and safety than the non-supervised group. The mentor observations also suggested that supervision had the greatest impact on co-creating the coaching relationship. The authors note that there's great value in distinguishing mentoring and supervision as distinct coach development activities, noting that supervision establishes a pattern of reflective learning and provides feedback on psychological aspects of coach behavior, which may enable or inhibit competent professional coaching. So, my provocative question for you to note down is, where are you in your developmental journey as a coach? And where do you want to go? So we'll take a few minutes for you to jot down your final reflections, and then we're going to break into small groups.
Francine, how long would you like them to be in breakout rooms?
Let's have 10 minutes in the breakout rooms, and then we will regroup, do a debrief, and have time for questions and answers. And when you go into your small groups, I encourage you to just discuss what themes maybe did you hear as we went through our conversations, and what do you see as the potential for the field of coaching? So Carrie, whenever you're ready.
Okay. I'm going to set the timer, and then I will put you in rooms. We will see you back here in 10 minutes.
And I'm going to pop into one of the groups just to see what they're talking about.
Great. I did not assign you, so you get to choose which one you.
All right. I'm going to room 2.
Okay.
And Carrie, you want to pause your recording?
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, welcome back, everyone. And so we're going to have about 15, 17 minutes to really open up the floor, find out what emerged for you, what came up in your discussion rooms, any questions you have. And then I'll turn it back to Carrie. I think I speak for my colleagues, and my colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I speak for my colleagues in saying that you all are most welcome to reach out to any one of us. If you have any questions, curiosities, desire to connect, want to continue the conversation, I think our bios are available on the website along with this webinar. And we would all be happy to have a follow-up conversation with any one of you. Okay, so with that, I'm just going to open the floor and see what has emerged for you. What are you thinking now, or what questions might you have?
Hi, Francine. This is Carl Heavenstreit. I
Carl,
just
nice
wanted
to see you. Yes.
great to see you as well after all this time, and Terry as well. We were in. I just want to make sure I'm correct about this. No, Sam and Mark were not in the room with us, and Neil was not in the room with us, but we were in the room of men that was randomly assigned. So Scott and Bill were with me, and we had discussed Lily's. I think we ended up talking about Lily's presentation specifically about the importance of diversity and inclusion, not just with the indigenous people from that she had discussed with the research and the experiences that she had, but also making sure that it's not just necessarily a safe space, but how can we create that ability to be inclusive, and also I think we didn't necessarily discuss this, but it was a theme that was mentioned later on about we don't know everything. So how can we just be open and just ask the questions and create the safe space for people to tell us what they need, tell us about their experiences, tell us about how we can help them and support them. So making sure that that just is across all clients that we have, not necessarily obviously taking the indigenous learnings and applying them to all the clients.
Yeah. Thank you, Carl. Yeah, we are so wonderfully varied and complex, aren't we, as a species? Yeah, thank you, Carl.
Francine, if I could jump in there.
Please.
Just to follow up from Carl. First, thank you all for putting this together. It's heartwarming for me to see how far we have come in these 12 years since I ventured into this water. Goodness gracious. this one of the distinctions that I am now seeing about supervision is the relational space that in large ways distinct from coaching. In supervision, we very intentionally attend to what's going on between the supervisee and me. And that richness, I believe, allows for the space between two people who are different. My greatest experience has been between Black men and me, Black women and me, you know, and to go right into it and say, here we are. What are our stories about reaching across the space between us? What are we experiencing right now together? And if we can arrive together, and it takes both of us, I think, to have those frank conversations. And even if I'm working with a white male from North America, that relational space, when it's rich enough to say what's actually happening between us right now, talk about developing the capacity for presence, which you talked about in your research. Oh my goodness. So that's what's been bubbling for me as all of you, and in my small group we were talking.
Thank you, Sam. I love that question. What are we both experiencing right here, right now?
And we know that so often what we're experiencing parallels what the coach and her or his or their client is experiencing with the same person. This provides the doorway into the larger systemic understanding of what's happening.
Thank you, Sam.
I'll just share something that I shared in the group, which was just huge gratitude for this book. There are just so many topics within the description of what was provided that resonated. I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I need. Oh my gosh, this is this next topic. So thank you for all who contributed, because I think it does fill a void. And I'm looking forward to getting it now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anne Marie. And I really do want to lift up the contribution that Lily and Dr. Goldvarg made in really initiating this project. And with the America's Coaching Supervision Network, they are continuing to explore these questions, examine these issues. Lily, if you want to say a word or two about ACSN, this might be a good chance.
Great. Let's do a little plug here. So we have an America's Coaching Supervision Network, and this is North, South, and Central America. And we actually have countries, 26, 28 countries represented in our network, it turns out. We have webinars every month, every third Monday of the month at 8 o'clock Pacific time. They're free for anybody. Lots of coaches come as well, and we have different topics that we examine that are in the supervision space. And we also have an annual conference that's coming up April 28th, 29th. So, and everyone's welcome again. And we will be talking about, we have Eric DeHaan coming. He's going to be our keynote speaker. He is really big on relational team coaching supervision. So that will be a big theme this, I think Okakon, your Dr. Okakanudo will also be facilitating a diversity panel. And we have all these different topics that you can choose to participate in. And at the end, we will have there's a survey being conducted right now on what are the themes in supervision right now. It's been a few years. And then at the end, towards the end, it'll be, what's the call to action for our profession right now, given the way the world is at? So you're all welcome to come. Let me know if you have any questions about any of that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pauline
Yeah.
or Francine.
Yeah. And I would note that contact information is also in the front of the book. Nice little plug. What else emerged, and what questions might you want to bring out to the group for consideration and exploration?
Oh,
Hi, this is Neil.
oh,
Gavin,
Neil,
Gavin,
you
go
go. I
first.
was gonna bring up what you brought up, so you go ahead. I defer to you.
Well, I'll say it one way, and maybe there'll be more for you here as well. Thank you for all of the contributions, for those of you here who've contributed and all the others who are not on this book. A couple of things really jumped out for me, and something I've been reflecting on in coaching in general as it relates to supervision. And it's this resistance to supervision because of vulnerability, which I find really fascinating for coaches to edge against supervision because they're feeling perhaps too vulnerable, given the work that coaches do in the world. And in particular, from a systemic point of view around what's going on in the world now and how coaches might serve the world, and therefore how coaching supervisors might serve coaches, that which Sam spoke to, and working and being with people across differences. It's a very vulnerable set of conversations. And so I really appreciate that this book and this conversation is happening, because I think it's an area that represents quite a large gap in coaching and in coaching supervision conversations. So I'm delighted it's showing up in this book. I'm delighted that ICF and other coaching organizations and coach training organizations are trying to move in a direction to honor full identities and to bring all of humanity into the conversations. Something I've certainly lived and continue to live, but I'm delighted that it's a big part of the conversation. I appreciate that.
Thank you. And I certainly welcome my colleagues to, if you have any thoughts about that or anything to add, because it is a key conversation.
I think it's an interesting challenge, in the U.S. because, as we know, EMCC and most of the European-based organizations have made supervision a requirement for ongoing re-credentialing. In other words, if you don't get supervision, you don't get your credential. The ICF has chosen not to do that, to make it an optional one of many solutions to continuing coach education and development. I'm curious from this group's perspective, what do you think we can do to increase the adoption or speed up the adoption curve in the United States, where supervision is still kind of an optional thing?
I'd like to, go ahead.
Go, Gavin. You've been trying to get in there.
Well, I'd like to offer that we offer coaching supervision to our members through our ICF chapter. And, the group is small but mighty, but what it has done is it inspired conversations with our members about what it is and how it can help them. And so I just offer that as a path for those who are serving their coaching communities. And it's been great, I just have to say.
So what Gavin's saying, I think, is really kind of what I was going to say too, which is for people to have an easy way to have an experience of supervision, to see its value. And it's interesting, I'm a recently trained supervisor, as some of you who were in my group and who was on the faculty know. And when I was reaching out to my original supervisees, some were put off by the judgmental implication of the term supervision. And I know that's been kind of an issue for a while, but I think for people to understand what it really is and how it can help you grow without, you know, a big barrier or a big jump or the fear of judgmentalness, I think could be very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And I would just offer an observation from my perspective that there is, especially in countries that are ICF aligned, there is a systemic tension in that ICF is increasingly metrically oriented, and that really creates a culture of performance awareness. You know, am I hitting all the marks in the competency base, which, even though the competencies speak to coach-client dynamics and relationships, they don't really promote the understanding of the human nature of that. It's not the performance of it, it is the being of it. Because you can't metrically measure being, I think we lose something in the translation. And that's just a systemic issue that anyone has a voice in ICF, we're free to take up. So, Neil, please go ahead.
I, you know, my own point of view, I've struggled with the metrics orientation, although I appreciate the need for it. And I'm also hopeful in this context of ICF and the Americas around sort of the new level 3 training, which I hope really helps to prepare coaches, at least for an MCC level. Hopefully it will work, you know, at all levels around the being. The coactive nature of what we do is both being and doing, and a true understanding of why there's a hyphen between co and active. They both exist all the time. And yes, there has been an indexing, I think, toward the active, the metrics, the hitting the marks. And I think there's some work to do on the co. And I'm hopeful that we are already moving in that direction. Because if we don't, coaching and coach supervision may suffer as modalities in service of humans.
Thank you, Neil. And then I think we have Sam, and I believe Carrie, I will need to turn it back over to you in the not too distant future. But Sam, please go ahead.
Just briefly, again, building with Neil, I think part of what's happening is that the coaching profession is slowly growing up. And just as we can't ask a teenager to be a mature elder, it's impossible, can't happen. And I say that based on observations of how ICF approaches ethics. That there's a huge energy put into learning the rules so I do it right and don't violate a rule. It's rule-based ethics in a large extent, certainly not entirely. But that's so different from people who are able to reflect on their work and figure out, for example, how they might be introducing subtle harm to the system or to the supervisee. That requires a different level of thinking that supervision really, really supports. So it's partly the maturity of the field itself, my perspective.
Thank you, Sam. We could have another 3-hour conversation about ethics and the cultivation of ethical judgment, but that's for another time. So again, I would like to thank my colleagues and thank all of you for joining. And Carrie, I believe it's back to you.
Yeah, a warm thank you, Lily, Sarah, Terry, Francine, for just generating this rich conversation. For those who aren't familiar with Fielding Graduate University's evidence-based coaching program, our students do get supervision, and they get it towards the end of the program after they've sort of had a sense of what mentoring looks like. We introduce supervision in a way that we hope will provide sort of a developed taste that they can then pursue when they're out in the world and in the field coaching. And perhaps that's another avenue that we could start to see a shift. So for those who are here for the 90 minutes, thank you. Thank you for being part of this rich conversation. Again, this session's being recorded. And if you do complete the survey that I posted in chat, we will get you your ICF CEU that you need to maintain that credential that we've just been discussing. So I hope everybody has a safe and warm Wednesday, and we hope to see you back next month for our next webinar on February 15th at 11 a.m. Pacific on the ethics, wisdom, and adult development and coaching. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.